All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Excess Exceed. This is Gearface, a perennial Exceed newbie, here sitting down with Fakey today to talk about, I think his favorite character, Specter Knight. Fakey, is that true of you? Is Specter Knight
I
your
think
guy?
I think that's true. Yeah.
My understanding is there's a handful of people in the Exceed community who are uh, really, really thoroughly associated with one character in particular. You've got like Vidi and Cammy. You've got a couple people like that. Whenever I think of Specter Knight, and in fact, when I was setting up this guide series, when I was talking to some people I trust about who to talk to for certain characters, they mentioned you for Specter Knight, and then nobody else. No one else got Specter Knight. It like I was like, okay, cool. Like if Fakey's not available, who's my backup? And they were like, what are you talking about? Fakey is the Specter Knight character, is the Specter Knight player. So I'm very excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here, Fakey.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks to whoever it is you asked who recommended me.
My mysterious benefactors. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. They shall remain nameless. Um, I'm just kidding. It was like Blue and D and people like that.
that
Um,
sounds right.
yeah. Uh, so super excited to be talking about Spectre Knight. I know basically nothing about him. I've picked him up one time and got trashed when I played him, so I'm very excited to learn a thing or two about him. Before we get started, a couple quick disclaimers. Number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. Things in sort of an Exceed tournament context. That's not the only way to play Exceed. Exceed is a fun game. You can play it for fun. I recommend, in fact, that you do play it for fun because it turns out that playing things for fun is fun. Um, Not only that, you'll play longer. You'll learn more by playing for fun than you will by playing to win all the time. Um, and if the lines of play that we're discussing on this show don't sound fun to you, don't play those lines. Play in a way that is enjoyable for you. Disclaimer number two: typically on this show, people tend to talk about strategy in pretty absolute terms. They say things like, you should always do this, you should never do this. Um, uh, Take all of those things with a grain of salt. Exceed's not a solved game. Um, I'm not an expert. Fakey is an expert, but even his opinion is just a very informed one. He's not, the final word or the final arbiter on all things Spectre Knight. So if we get something wrong, or if we underrepresent or undervalue a certain part of this character, please let us know, and we can turn this into a conversation. Um, yeah. With all that said, Fakey, tell me a little bit about Spectre Knight.
All right. Specter Knight is a character that I picked up pretty late, actually. I used to be more drawn towards characters that I think a lot of people are generally drawn to. Characters with really high, not really high, characters with really the least low valleys, because every character is a miserable pile of upsides and downsides, right?
Right, right, right.
um some of them more than others. Previously I was playing a lot of, let's say, Propeller Knight was one.
Okay.
um I was playing a lot of Cammy. I was playing a fair amount of Ryu. These characters all, their upsides are not super high. They have some cute things that they do that people like, but they're mostly popular because they don't have a bunch of glaring weaknesses, right?
Okay.
um and over time, my gameplay changed to be a lot more aggressive. I like games that end before the reshuffle,
Okay.
which pushed me more towards characters like Sea Viper and then later Specter Knight. I think I heard a lot of talk about Specter Knight being bad
Yeah.
generally,
Yep.
which I thought was interesting. And it's true that there are a lot of cards in this kit that are not great and effects that are overcosted. Uh, there are a lot of very high force costs, and your economy is pretty terrible.
Yeah.
So the valleys in this character are a lot deeper than they are for most of the other cast that I've played and tried out. However, I really liked one thing in particular that caught my eye, and that is that no other character is going to turn one of the game. You take your mulligans. Spectre Knight goes first. No other character is going to let you throw 8 power at the opponent turn 1 at speed 6 from the opening position and
Right.
have the opponent have nothing they can do about it.
Yeah, so just you can just like from the starting gun, you can just uh, immediately you're immediately going, you're immediately running your game plan.
Yeah, I have
Okay.
lost count of how many times I have shaved off a third of my opponent's life total on the first turn of the game.
Yeah.
That's a good place to be,
Oh yeah, no,
in my opinion.
you're feeling pretty good about that. I feel like spiritually, mentally, you're doing pretty well at that point. Maybe your
Yeah.
opponent less so.
Well, it comes at a cost, right? Which is all your cards. But
Right, right.
the valleys might be deep, but the peaks are also really high.
Okay. That makes sense. And we've had a couple of characters on this show covered before who you like, like you would sort of politely describe as being off meta characters who are
Mhm.
either, on the weaker side of things or just perceived as being on the weaker side of things. And whether that's true or not, and getting Exceed players to agree on things like that is a difficult proposition, and I hope you have your whole afternoon uh, set aside in order to lay out the parameters of that conversation. But even if that is true, a character who has weaknesses or who has issues in the meta can still absolutely run you over if you know what you're doing. Or if the person piloting them knows what they're doing, a low tier or off meta character can still dismantle an opponent.
True.
Would you say that like having played a lot of Specter Knight and you picked him up because people were saying that he's weak? Is your
Yes.
opinion of him that they're wrong or that they were overselling his weakness? Like where do you find him on like the overall pyramid of Exceed characters?
Hmm. My feelings are this. I was drawn to Spectre because I liked the aggressive lines that I
Mhm.
was seeing from him. And because I'm naturally drawn to characters that I think are weaker, to my own detriment, probably.
Sure, sure. Yeah,
um, I think also Exceed is an awesome game, and you can win a tournament with any character, in my opinion.
right.
You're like often unnecessarily hamstringing yourself by not picking a top tier, but you can win a character with you can win a tournament with any character
Yeah, yeah.
because Exceed is awesome like that. Uh, I don't know exactly where the perception that Spectre Knight was weak came from. I'm told that in development, this character was a much stronger version of this kit and had to be nerfed, and for that reason, a lot of people are down on him. Maybe.
Right.
Uh, I'm going to tell you confidently, Spectre Knight is the second best character of the Shovel Knight season,
Okay.
and I cannot be moved. I can be moved from that opinion, but that's my current belief.
That's your that that
With Plague
that
Knight being stronger.
that's your potentially hot take about Spectre Knight. The reason I ask is not actually to like create debate about this character. It's more that like if somebody is interested in picking up Specter Knight, because part of these guides are also like endorsements of these characters. If somebody's
Mhm.
interested in picking up Specter Knight, I don't want the the perception around him to negatively influence people. So it's good to hear that he has some sauce and he can do some things because he seems like a cool character, and I feel like the way that people talk about him could dissuade people from picking him up.
No, Spectre Knight is, I think, an extremely strong character. Actually,
Okay,
uh,
cool.
I've taken, mind you, like high risk, high reward. Personally,
Right.
this is a character that I've taken to tournaments with good players, with older, much like higher ceiling seasons. This is a character who has taken plenty of wins off of top tier season two characters,
Mhm.
characters that should have been long banned, in my opinion, but
Right.
are now rotated out. This is a character that's beat your Hazumas. This is a character that beats Reneas. This is a character that's beaten who else? I beat a Zolt with him. I beat Lucia with him. I beat a couple of season one characters that are kind of annoying. This character you would not be embarrassed to bring to a tournament, and in fact, I've made several deep tournament runs with this character.
Awesome. Yeah, you then in that case you heard it here first, folks. And in fact, you might have heard it here first because there's a possibility that this is not an opinion that's shared very much in the community. Uh, Specter Knight is tournament playable. Please, if you are interested in him, try him out. Do you want to get into how to try him out? How does this guy work?
Specter Knight is I guess the starting point that I want to jump into is the front side ability,
Okay.
which is how to how to best put this. Before Advance 2 is really strong text.
Hmm.
Okay.
Sure.
Before Advance 2 turns any attack into an ultra attack as far as quality.
Yep. Okay.
A before Advance 2 grasp beats or trades with everything. A
Yep.
before Advance
Yep.
2 sweep, your opponent will never get away from it. You're always connecting. A before Advance 2 Bounding Soul is a range 4, speed 5, 6 power thing, which is awesome. God forbid you put stats on
Right.
it. And yeah, you can only use it defensive, or you can only use it offensively on the front side. But that's a good boost. Lots of characters who have before Advance 2 as a boost in their kit, they mulligan for that card so they can go turn 1, bam, play this thing. Now I have the high ground. Now I have the advantage. Turn 1, it's awesome. You
Right.
have that boost all the time. You can never run out of it. You can never lose it. It's always there and it's awesome.
Right. Okay. And so so you're obviously part of Specter Knight's game plan is learning how to leverage that movement ability. And I'm seeing on the card here that it requires you to seal two. Um, so there's obviously an economic cost
Yes.
to doing this frequently. So you're managing your resources carefully. So I guess my first question is, how frequently can you afford to use this ability, and how frequently do you want to be using this ability?
I think I'm generally going to try to talk about the character in terms of my actual played experiences
Sure.
instead of like waggling my fingers in the air and talking about character theory
Theory,
because I
totally.
think
Yeah.
those conversations are I don't know, in practice and on paper are totally different things.
Yep. Yep. Agreed.
In practice, I actually end up using my character ability on the front side once or twice a game. Not very
Okay.
often.
Okay.
And part of that is you actually have a better version of this text right here on the boost Judgment Rush on one of your ultras.
Okay.
Your resources are better spent on that boost than your character ability, but the boost is not stapled to your actual character, so you got to draw it, and you also got to draw the resources to use it.
Right. And so this is a 3 force ultra boost. Um, so it's close to instead of advanced to.
Hmm.
Um, you could conceivably do this on defense if they. Oh, and I'm sorry, no, it's a now strike boost, and it's got
Yep.
some stats stapled to it. So that's a lot of meat on one boost.
Yeah. Think about it like this. Um, you could just use your character ability and strike, but suppose you have one copy of each ultra in your hand and you want to strike with like an assault or something.
Right.
You could seal, one of your ultras and some other card and strike with your assault, which costs you 2 cards plus your assault. Or you could boost uh, the Judgment Rush plus spend the Barrier Lantern for force plus spend some other card
One
and then
more
strike with the
card.
assault. Yep. And what you've done is you've essentially just added this card to the equation for +2 power and +1 speed.
Right.
That's pretty good. +2 power, +1 speed, essentially take another action is good value. It actually works out.
Right. Right.
Um,
Okay.
and the
So
stats are a big deal. It turns a lot of attacks into like real stuff. Your Bounding Soul now, instead of your opponent getting away with a cross or just trading with a sweep, suddenly Bounding Soul is now beating both those things
yeah,
with that increase in stats
it's beating focus, I think, even, right? It's hitting
because it hits
8.
for 8.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy. Okay. Um yeah, so things that beat cross and focus are not common.
No.
Okay, so that's a whole lot of stats you're talking about on a card. So when you're talking about your character ability,
Mhm,
you're talking about it in terms of one of your outlets to dump resources into, and it's competing with this one, because you're spending force on that. Um, are you also, you know, this isn't a situation where you can spend gauge on your ability or something like that. So he has kind of other economic outlets that let him do other things. But in
mhm.
terms of just hand management, getting into gauge economy or anything like that yet. You do this once or twice a game, uh, just because you don't have the resources to do it more than that, or is it because you're spending those resources on other things like Judgment Rush?
Both those things, honestly.
Uh,
2 cards from hand is pretty pricey. That's a full prep action.
right,
Um, it's a combination of those things and more. Uh, you on your front side are actually not terribly sad to just stay at close range to the opponent because um, a lot of your attacks actually happen to be at close range. There are many characters who have, especially characters that people are going to play in tournaments. One of the things a character really needs to have, really wants to have to be competitive in tournaments is you need to have game at range 4. This character has no game at range 4 defensively. Flat 0. You're often just blocking, you're often crossing away to get away from something that your opponent's throwing at you, but it's your opponent's going to be trying to get to range 4 and then throwing attacks at you to farm free hits off of you.
right. Yeah, I'm
Um,
seeing. Yeah, you're right. Literally nothing other than dive. And
yeah.
if you're defending with dive, you are consigned to losing to your opponent's dive. Like it's pretty dire for him. It's at range 4. It looks like.
Yep. Uh,
Okay.
which is why offensively at range 4 you're fantastic because you use your character ability or you play judgment rush and then you throw an attack with lots of advantage on it, or uh defensively you're generally losing strikes.
Right. And you're waiting for your turn to turn the tables back around, weathering the storm kind of thing, and then you spring on them with your character ability. But once you're in,
Exactly.
now you don't need to use it anymore. Until they get away from you, you're not necessarily uh spending it every turn to keep on moving around. You're willing to stick in their face and just brawl with them for a while.
Yeah. there's
Okay.
this there's this concept that I've talked about before, not here but in general, called the
Yeah.
cross test, which is a character's cross attack good for them, and more than
Oh,
that, is your opponent's cross attack good for you?
sure. It's like uh I'm playing Sagat.
Mhm.
I throw a tiger shot, you cross out, and I'm immediately rubbing my hands together because you might have just lost the game by spending that cross into me.
Exactly.
I gotcha.
Cross is a very powerful attack, but there are many characters for whom it's actually position negative,
Mhm.
which really dulls how awesome it is to beat a focus or sweep, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Um, Specter Knight's really weird because your initiated crosses are bad for you because you're passing the turn to the opponent and now you're at range 4 or 5.
Right, and you
But
really don't want to be. But if you defensively cross, I see. Now
then
you
it's awesome.
can spend your ability and have a spend resources on your ability and have an advantage attack into them.
Exactly.
Okay. And
Um,
in terms of what you're using your ability on at range 4 or range 3, sort of at the middle to long ranges, it does it really just kind of work with everything?
the answer is yes. You
Okay.
have the nastiest mix-ups in the whole game. Is it a sweep? Is it an assault? Is it a bounding soul? Is it a spike? You know,
Right.
it's everything, and I do set everything.
Okay.
There is some. Can I go on a little tangent here about Exceed and
Let me check
playing
the
against
name of
opponents?
let me check and make sure that the name of the show here is still Excess Exceed. Seems like you're good.
In Exceed, more than many other card games, what deck your opponent is playing matters way less than the opponent you're playing against.
Okay.
Um, in Exceed, there are characters who live for the micro of the strikes. A strike happens, and they sit down and they look at every card and they do all the math in their head and they go, okay, this beats this, 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 this loses to X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do this because this is the best value for me. Or they'll think about, like, okay, you use these cards. You're really telling me that you're the kind of person that loves to put a little risk in their strikes to go for better value. They're willing
Right.
to lose, take a little bit of damage to get a good hit in. And then they'll like figure out what you're doing. I'm one of those people.
Right.
There are other people who only care about the macro of the game. They're thinking about the whole deck. They're viewing it as a game of chess. Um, Against the second kind of person, I will prioritize making connections. I will prioritize throwing crosses, spider sides, EX assaults, anything that I know will hit, even if my opponent correctly reads it and like plays it slow, right? And I trade down.
You're just looking
Um,
to generate gauge and value across multiple strikes in that case.
Correct.
Okay.
Against players that play a little looser, against players that I think are not playing the value game but are instead prone to try to call me out, you
Mhm.
know, those players I will be greedier against. Those players are getting range 4 spiked.
Okay.
Yeah. So my Specter Knight game is pretty heavily adaptive to what my opponent's game plan is.
That makes sense. And like, I mean, in that kind of situation, you're not, you're not Hazama where you're obfuscating your movement or anything like that. When you initiate with this
Mhm.
attack, people know it. They know it's coming, and in some ways, that's like an advantage to you because now you can mix them up a little bit and go for a little bit of spice.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Um, you've touched on Gauge a little bit.
Yeah.
Specter Knight is a character who has a 4 gauge exceed cost, which is a ridiculous price.
Hmm.
Um, and your exceed side ability uses more gauge.
Okay. So if you're going, so he's if at least doing exceed mode things. I'm not sure if he wants to or not. He's very
Oh,
gauge
he
hungry.
wants to.
He wants to. Okay.
He he's extremely gauge hungry, but the exceed side is worth all the gauge in the world.
Gotcha.
Uh,
Okay.
let's flip him and talk about it. Actually,
Yeah. Absolutely.
uh,
First of all, amazing art. Uh,
isn't it?
looks so cool. So you swap all. Actually, before we talk about his exceed side in particular, I actually wanted to make a note about sealed cards because it's something that doesn't come up in a lot of characters' kits, and there's a decent chance that somebody watching this has never seen this before. So, and please correct my math on any of this if I'm
Mhm.
wrong. If I'm sealing something, I'm playing grasp with my character ability, and this is my hand over here. I take two cards from it. I don't discard them. They just go somewhere else. They go over here
Yep.
somewhere, and this is my sealed area. And unless the character that you are playing has something in their kit somewhere that interacts with their sealed area in some way. So, for example, Specter Knight, oops, um, he may swap all cards in his sealed area with his deck, then shuffle his deck. Unless a character has something like that, when your sealed cards are sealed, you can't do anything with them. When you reshuffle, they don't go back in your deck. You don't get them ever again. They're gone. They're like it's like if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering, it's like they've been exiled or something like that. Is that pretty much
Correct.
correct, Fakey?
It is pretty much correct.
Okay. And so
Interestingly, though, sorry, please.
no go ahead. I think you're actually going the same place as me.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, they're not really gone because you have boosts that we'll get into that care about your sealed area. So there is some setup and interesting counterplay. It's more like you're putting those cards in your pocket for later.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So some characters have like when the sealed area, like you've pitched them into the garbage can. For Specter Knight, it's more like you're holding them and you're looking for a way to get them back later.
Mhm.
Okay. And so his exceed side, and this is where we'll pick up where we started here. So you want to flip 4
Oh yeah.
gauge, and this is a big deal. Um, so tell me a little bit about the exceed side. I'm already seeing spend 1 gauge plus 1 power before advance 2 is a lot of things. Um, oh, this is you can do this defensively.
Oh yeah. You figured it out.
Oh, okay. I get you.
Suddenly, you are now the best range 4 character in the whole game, period.
Okay. Yeah, that's some dangerous stuff. 1
That
gauge
is
plus 1
crazy
power
text.
advance 2. Yeah, okay.
Um, I'll quick bullet points on why this is crazy. One, as an aside, this you may swap your sealed area with your deck. I actually very rarely do this unless like the exact situation comes up where I have like 1 to 2 cards left in my deck. And I know what they are because I can solve for them. And I know what my sealed area is because I put those cards there. And I'm just
Right.
like, I just like my sealed cards better than my deck. And then I'll swap them. But
Right.
usually I don't do that because I prefer to just have the rest of my cards.
Right. I mean,
Uh,
in order to make use of this ability, it sounds like you would have to be like curating your sealed area all game in order to have like the perfect combination. It actually seems like it's more likely that if circumstances allow you to benefit from this, you'll do it, but you're not trying to like you're not planning from turn one what's going into your sealed area in order to get it back later.
Precisely. It's not
Gotcha.
something I set up for, but when I exceed, I'll then like take a moment to evaluate and decide if it's a good idea or not. And the
Right.
answer, like 75% of the time, is no.
Right. And because he has a 4 gauge exceed cost, and 4 gauge is sometimes pricey enough that you are, especially if you're ending games before the first reshuffle the way that you sometimes do,
Hmm.
you might be pretty far into your deck at that point. Like the game may be closing closing out fairly soon by the time you get to your exceed mode. So, if you your first four attacks hit and generate gauge, and then you get a couple more for your ability, and then you flip over. You've used 6 cards. You've sealed 2 of them. You're probably not going to swap them at that point.
That's usually the case.
Okay, but in a longer game when you've exceeded later and you have a lot more cards in your sealed area, there's a higher chance of that happening.
Yeah. It's
Okay,
it's a it's a question you pose yourself when you flip, but I generally recommend not even thinking about it until that moment comes up.
okay, that makes sense. And but really, what you want is uh defensive, crazy ranged four play and some extra power.
Correct. It's a
Okay,
combination of things that make this exceed side ability so much better than your front side ability. For starters, you can do it defensively. Your opponent strikes at range 3, and you're like, meh, I throw a range 3 grasp at you.
right,
Whatever you have, I hope it was a slow.
right.
Um, you are now spending gauge instead of cards from hand, which means that very often what happens is, by the way, try to flip with 5 cards in your gauge so that you have one remaining so you can just immediately start using the ability.
Immediately do it. Right.
Yep. Otherwise, you're left in this weird no man's land where you can't use your ability left. You can't use your ability anymore
Mm,
because you don't have the gauge for it. But also, you've lost access to the ability to begin with. So you're like scrambling to get that first gauge. Just flip with 5 gauge, save yourself the trouble.
okay, that makes sense.
Um, but also, the +1 power is so relevant. There are a lot of breakpoints that you suddenly start hitting. Your bounding souls from range 4 or range 1 now hit for 7, which breaks sweep.
Sweep, sure.
Your own sweeps now start breaking sweep. There are a lot of characters that have 3 guard randomly on their
Yep,
little things that are meant to punish fast attacks.
yep,
Well, now your little fast attacks hit for 4 and they break that guard.
yep. And 4 is a very common number in Exceed. So things like your I don't know, your assault can beat a Tatsu now or something like that. Like just
Yeah.
bumping up +1 power on relevant attacks is it comes up more often than you'd think, other than the big obvious like sweep breakpoints.
Yeah. That cross test we were talking about before,
Right.
your offensive crosses are awesome now. Because now we're at range 4, we're at range 5. What are you gonna do? You gonna move in? Okay. You spent your resources and now it's back to my turn.
Right. And now
Or if you strike me, it's whatever. Throw
yeah,
whatever I
you're
want at you.
and you probably just hit with that cross. You now have gauge and you can spend it. So once you've exceeded, you're are you pretty consistently spending gauge? Like I can't imagine that there's first of all, I can't imagine that the game's going to last much longer after this. But
Yeah.
I can't imagine that you're going to be building up an overage of gauge to exceed and then play an ultra or something. It seems more likely that you're going to exceed and then use your ability a lot to just hammer people.
Yeah, truth be told, I think if I'm initiating with a strike, then I don't often. Then it's a mix of using the ability or just like raw striking,
Hmm,
because getting a second gauge is actually awesome because it means if you whiff or if you get randomly beat by something, you have
right.
a backup gauge so you can
Right.
keep your game going. But defensively, I do actually almost always use it.
Okay.
The reason for that is before. So the speed curve is a thing that people will talk about in Exceed a lot.
Yep.
Uh, if we're at range 4, then generally the fastest an attack is going to be is speed 4.
Yep.
However, before advance is secretly like a speed boost, actually, because
Yeah,
a
sure.
before advancing cross, your opponent's not going to have a speed 6 thing that beats a cross at range 4. So you
Yeah.
can use your ability, advance with cross, and you hit everything before they can hit you. You're just
Yeah.
faster than them at that range now.
Speed and range are kind of fungible in Exceed a little bit, where all right, like you're not making your cross faster, but if cross hits at range 4, it's like above the speed limit of what attacks are allowed to have at that range.
True.
So
Exactly.
you're okay. That makes sense. So you're it actually it's kind of similar to how like Mole Knight works, or other characters who can staple on that before movement lets them mess with the speed curve in fun ways.
Hmm.
I get you.
Exactly.
Okay. So in terms of overall game plan, you are in the early game throwing mix-ups, using your character ability uh, in pretty specific situations where you are trying to move in.
Hmm.
Keeping pressure on because you're an offensive kind of rush downy character, building enough gauge to exceed, preferably 5, and then flipping, and then hopefully just killing the opponent with a lot of really dangerous stuff that you can now do. Um, where do in terms of like game plan considerations before we get into the attacks themselves, where do like
Hmm.
your ultras fit into that? Do you play are you looking to play them too, or is the exceed mode generally your number one priority?
Uh, so Specter Knight, I don't know. Someone embezzled a little bit from his power budget, and I think they took it out of their. I think they took it out of his ultras.
Out of his ultras?
These are terrible.
Okay.
These are terrible, terrible ultras. And I'll touch a bit on why. 3 gauge is such a steep cost to pay when your exceed side is so good and you're really trying to get to it.
Right.
Um, Dread Reaper has this unique problem of Dread Reaper and Dread Talon are the exact same attack. They both
Oh,
beat the same
they
cards.
be
They
the same
both lose to
things.
the same cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dread Reaper hits for 10, but like, wouldn't you rather just save the 3 gauge and
Yeah.
hit them for a little less? Especially when your gauge could be used so much better elsewhere.
If you're still winning the strike, are you how much like do you like yeah, I might want to do 5 damage, but I don't know if I want to do 5 damage so much that I'm going to spend 3 gauge on it.
Yep.
Um okay, that makes sense. And the pull 4 could be an advantage, it could be a disadvantage because it depends on how well you can move back in.
Mhm. Barrier Lantern is a little more exciting because attacks that say blah 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 don't hit you, be it speed or certain ranges. That's
Right.
good text. We like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
But if you really think about it, this is just the same attack as Spike, you know? And Spike's also not 3 gauge.
Right. Okay.
You get what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I see what you mean. So this is it's almost like convenient then that you have a very high gauge threshold to meet and very little competition for the rest of uh your gauge payouts. It's like it would be much harder if all three of these things were equally valuable and you really had to make a hard decision, but especially for new players,
Mhm.
focusing on this is it seems like priority one almost every time. Do you ever find yourself playing these ultras?
So, yes, every tool, once you really get deep into a character and you've played hundreds and hundreds of games with them, like you'll use every tool.
Right.
I have played, apologies, I
It's okay.
have played Dread Reaper and connected with it, and I've missed with many of them.
Right?
I have played Barrier Lantern at times, but most of the times I am either losing so badly that it's like whatever. My exceed side won't matter because the game's going to be done in a few turns anyway, and I just need to close the gap like right now.
So
Um,
it's a comeback. It's like a YOLO sort of Hail Mary comeback mechanic at that point.
yeah, not a good one.
Right, sure. But listen, if you hit for 10 and gain advantage, that's a pretty big comeback, but you're right. It's not gonna yeah,
it's
it's certainly not a consistent way to win a game.
yeah, it's don't play these.
Okay,
Don't once you've had enough games, you'll find rare moments where you're like, well, I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna play it. And then
right.
sometimes it's good for you, and but it's like very rare, very almost all the time. Setting one of these is super low on the totem pole for actually accurate game actions.
Okay. That's good to know. You know, you do it and then you get like a little achievement notification that you found the correct situation to use one of these cards.
Yeah,
Um
don't play these.
and also conveniently you were talking about Judgment Rush being a particularly strong boost. Good. That means I don't have to worry about losing my copies of Judgment Rush by playing the Ultra.
Yeah, they very generously put Specter Knight's best boost on his worst card.
Right. All right. Perfect. All right. So now the new shape of the game plan includes get to exceed side as fast as possible, kill your opponent with your exceed side, and you have force or boosts to help you along with
Correct.
it on your ultras, not necessarily attacks competing for that gauge.
Yeah, you don't often get characters that are necessarily so like this is the correct thing to do with this 99% of the time. It's kind of
Right.
relieving in a way.
Yeah, no, again, for a new player especially, I think that that's pretty valuable, to be able
Yeah.
to turn off some options and say like, nope, don't care about this. Um,
Yeah.
do we want to get into the the kit breakdown itself, or do you have any more notes about his kind of overall high level game plan?
Mainly just that now strike. Like part of evaluating this character is it's easy to get bogged down in the high force costs and the fact that you have poor defensive game overall, honestly.
Right.
Um, but now strike is good text. It's really good text. And especially when it's paired with something strong. I mean, like everybody at some point discovers that one boost that I think Sagat has, which is just +2 speed now strike.
Oh,
And they're like,
you're talking
that's
about
Sagat, right?
preemptive strike is it's guile. There we go. Yeah,
You said go?
yeah, the one on his on Sonic Hurricane. I did a lesson on guile. I'm here to help
Oh,
this
you're
guy.
so right. Yes,
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
Sonic Hurricane.
That guy. Oh yeah, that boost is ludicrous.
Everybody at some point discovers that, like, hold on, I play this, and now my spike's insane, and my opponent doesn't get any counterplay. There's nothing they can do.
They just
Uh,
I just spend a lot of resources and yeah, maybe it's like inefficient resources, but they die from it.
yeah. And we've talked a little bit about how
Oh.
Ooh is kind of like +2 speed, right?
Sorry, I did I you cut out for 1 second there, Fakey. Did you
Apologies.
say that before advance 2 is kind of like plus 2 speed?
In some circumstances, yeah.
Yes, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going with
So
this. Yeah.
having +2 speed now strike as a character ability is pretty crazy,
For
honestly.
and not even including like plus 2 speed plus 1 power now strike is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually
that's good text.
that's
Focus
actually
on that part.
crazy. Yeah, no, that's fair. All right,
uh,
so that's our game plan is use that
yeah.
line of text as many times as possible, offense and defense.
Yeah, the flip
Um,
side is where it's at. Burning 2 cards for the front side is expensive. You'll do it a couple of times, but focus on, like focus on generating gauge more than anything. How tight or how loose you should play depends on your opponent, right?
right. Okay. And I'm as we get into the kit, I'm sure we'll talk about like what cards are you spending when you're sealing things, like sort of the sealed mechanic interactions I'm curious about as well. But do you want to get
Sure.
into the actual kit breakdown?
Let's do it. I actually
Yes,
wanna reorganize these a little bit.
please do.
Uh, I want to swap the position of these 2.
You got it.
And let's do it like this, actually.
Sure. And just go from Spider Scythe.
And go from Spider Scythe, yeah.
All right. So what do we got here? We've got a DP shape that pushes or pulls. Okay.
Yeah. I said before that Specter Knight doesn't have great defenses, and that is kind of true. You what you have really is a lot of shapes that are you have a lot of shapes that characters like to have. You have a DP, right?
Mhm.
You have a range 1 spike in the form of Dread Talon. Uh, and these things are if you don't have these cards in your kit, it's kind of a hole, a defense or a defensive hole that can be exploited by your opponent.
Mhm.
However, these are attacks that don't often actually win strikes. You have to call out what the opponent is doing. So you have a whole kit full of these things that are like, I have to call out exactly the thing. And if I win, I'm rewarded, but it's rough. Spider Scythe is the nicest attack in your kit in that it's your 1 hyperspeed at range 2.
Right.
You
You're
know, I
you're you're
initiate a.
ab- you're above
Sorry, go
curve
ahead.
here. You're sorry. Yeah. No, that was all I was gonna say is that you're above curve here. So continue.
Yeah. I initiate a strike at range 1. I set a grasp. You play like a cross, trying to get away from whatever. I move you into range 2. I'm holding a spider scythe. If you attack, I'm going to connect. I'm going to
Right.
get my second gauge. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
and that's very good. People who play this game pick up on the fact that hyperspeeds are good,
Mhm.
right? Just having an attack that it doesn't matter what you set. Yeah, I might lose the strike, but I'm guaranteed to connect. It's good
Sure,
stuff.
sure.
Uh,
Especially with a character as resource intensive and as gauge hungry as Specter Knight is, you want that gauge bad.
yeah. Don't, in general, initiate with strikes that are good defensively.
Right.
Is It's generally inaccurate to do that. You are generally better off throwing something that can squeeze little value out of your opponent than playing a spider scythe at range 2 offensively and being like, well, that extra point of speed didn't super matter unless you've
Sure,
got your opponent on EX cross, which, you know, sometimes you got to trip them up like that. But
sure. And if but in general, if you could do the same thing on defense, if you could spend a strike on your opponent's turn to get the same value of spending it on your turn, you should probably do it on your opponent's turn.
yeah, there's
Okay.
like, why throw out the EX grasp on your own turn when it's still going to be just as good on your opponent's, right?
Right. Yeah.
This
I get
is
you.
an attack I set defensively 75% of the time, and I initiate with 25% of the time.
Yep. Makes sense.
Um,
It's
Usually,
also
when sorry, go ahead.
just really quickly, I noticed it's also a force special. So again in a resource intensive kit, is this a situation where you need to be careful uh with your expenses? You know, like how much of a budget are you on card wise? Are you worried about playing a force special?
Here's my take on that. If you end the game with 7 cards in your hand, that's 7 cards that you didn't use. What are you doing?
Okay. Okay.
If you end the game with 0 cards in hand, then every card found a use. That's
Okay.
all.
I get you. So if you need it, you'll spend it.
Yeah, no cost is too high if it means winning the game. Uh,
Makes sense.
this is a character who you will use all your resources. You're on a shoestring budget. This is a good attack. It's a little overpriced if we're being honest, but whatever. You pay the cost, you land the hits, you get the gauge. It's
You get
worth
the
it.
gauge. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you want to cover strikes first and then go into boosts, or do we want to cover it card by card?
I think I prefer card by card personally
Okay.
because when someone's playing and they get this card in their hand, they're going to try to make a game plan around this card.
Right.
Um, and that often means figuring out what its purpose is going to be.
Am I going to boost with this? Am I going to strike with it? Is it going to be force? Right. Sure.
Yeah. Or a fourth option, which is this card getting sealed?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I never seal this card. It is both too good as a boost and as a strike. The boost is amazing. This might
Oh,
be the best boost in your kit, actually.
draw 3 cards I already like because I'm sealing cards for my ability sometimes and I might need it. Then
Yeah.
strike with a card from your sealed area. Okay, so this is one of the interactions with the sealed area that you mentioned, that he has ways to get stuff back. Um,
Yeah.
okay. And your sealed area hidden information? The cards
Yes, it's face down.
put into your sealed area are face down. Okay, so your opponent doesn't know what this is, even if you only have 1 card in your sealed area. Okay, that's good to know.
Mhm.
So I can see the value already just in drawing 3 cards for 2 force. That sounds great. But uh, striking from my sealed area, I mean, I guess that's recursion, right? Like if I just put a sweep in there and sweeps a good card, I can get it again.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's mostly what you're using this for is just getting a good attack.
Honestly, it's mostly just to keep the cards flowing.
Oh,
And it gives you just a lot of tempo. Let me give you like an example.
yeah,
Um, Turn 1, I seal 2 cards, I strike with something. Doesn't really matter what. But let's say I seal 2 cards and I strike with throwing sickle here, which is a something I actually very often do. I think this is a great thing to initiate with. Um, I get a hit, my opponent does whatever. Now we're at range 3, it's back to my turn. I now have 2 cards left in hand because I set the sickle, I sealed 2 cards. Those
right.
2 cards are Spider Scythe and something else. What I can do is I can spend one of those cards as force, play the Gathering Darkness on the Spider Scythe, draw 3 cards. I have 2 cards sealed already from the throwing sickle attack. I'm just going to set one of those, and then I now have 3 fresh cards. Let's seal 2 of those, leaving a card that's going to be relevant at range 1 now, in case my opponent strikes me back on their turn.
I
And then I
see.
just strike with something from my sealed area, advancing again.
I see. Okay, so the three cards can be for immediate ability use to keep the pressure on,
Yep.
and the strike is just something that you put there before because you saw that you had Spider Scythe in your hand and you knew that like you didn't need to plan 10 turns ahead in order to have something in your sealed gauge to strike with. You saw that you had Spider Scythe in your hand, you're like, "Oh, cool. This is a good card to strike with. I'll put it here for now."
Yeah, and I'll just throw whatever I have in my sealed area that hits at range 1.
I gotcha. I gotcha. So it's not it's less of a you don't need to like 4D chess your way to get value out of Gathering Darkness because you know that you can get stuff out of your sealed gauge and you might just be able to do it right away.
Yep. And in
Okay.
fact, more than anything, there are a lot of Exceed characters that are very like card gamey, season 5 especially,
Okay.
where you're playing this whole game of chess where where every card ends up matters. I want if anyone's thinking of picking up Specter Knight, don't think of Specter Knight that way. Specter Knight's biggest advantages that you should be trying to take advantage of is the fact that you have great tempo and you have great strike initiates. Um, throw high powered strikes at the opponent, spend your stuff. Don't think too much about how you're spending it. You'll sort of get an intuition and a feel for where you personally like it when where cards end up.
Right.
But just keep the cards flowing, keep the strikes going, keep the gauge coming, and once you're at 5 gauge, flip and just murder the opponent.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense. So you're keeping this either to initiate or to respond with on defense at range 2 to call out, you
Hmm.
know, axe kick or dangerous range 2 attacks or keep your opponent from crossing out, or you're using it for tempo with Gathering Darkness.
Yep.
It's never
Um,
sealed. You're very rarely spending it as force either.
yep. That's generally true.
Okay, sounds good.
Dread
Anything else
Talon.
on Spy? Okay, Dread Talon, let's do it.
No, that's kind of all honestly.
Okay,
Spider Sight's biggest value is that if you're at range 2 and your opponent initiates a strike and you're thinking about what to respond with, you can just throw out Spider Scythe a ton of the time. Like,
right.
yeah, your opponent might be sweeping you or they might be focusing you or whatever, and you might trade down, but you got the gauge.
You got the
Whatever,
gauge.
right?
Yep, makes sense. And
Um,
you're willing to sacrifice that to get your real win condition online.
yeah.
Okay,
Um,
sounds good.
Dread Talon is another one of those cards I was talking about that are it's not amazing. People are thinking about this card the whole time when they're fighting against you.
Right.
People like in general are very scared of range 1
Range one
spikes.
spikes, definitely. I am.
Yeah. You really have to figure out if your opponent is the kind of person to play a range 1 spike.
Right.
I guess this is
Or
telling on myself.
or
I'm generally not that
whether they'll
person.
just you're just gonna threaten your opponent with it for a long time and then they're gonna play around it and you'll punish them for that.
Yeah. If you're
I
sweating
gotcha.
the whole time about Dread Talent, I'm happy because it means
Yep.
you're playing a lot of fasts.
Yep.
You're not playing very many slows. And that's cool for me because if you're playing really tight like that, and I pick up on the fact that you're really respecting Dread Talon, I'm going to farm a ton of gauge off of you with spider sides, grasps, crosses, assaults.
Right, right, right.
It's just how it works.
Yep.
Um,
So no matter it sounds like then no matter what you do with this card, whether you spend it as force, whether you seal it, whether you do anything, make sure that you have at least one copy somewhere that your opponent doesn't know where it is.
yeah,
If you have two copies of Red Talon in your discard or in your gauge, your opponent can be free to do stuff much more easily now.
yeah. Then
So
you're going
keep
to suddenly find that your opponent's trading up on you a lot with slows.
okay. So you keep one to threaten with to keep them in check, or you play them to actually call out, depending on the kind of player you are.
Yep.
Gotcha.
I do play this card a lot, especially if I'm at range 1, my opponent initiates a strike, and I'm like, I really think you're playing a slow here. I'm just going to call it
Yeah.
out. And sometimes I'm right.
Yeah. Sure.
Most often, and this is telling on myself, I seal these.
Okay.
I just don't like it. It's losing. I prioritize gauge a lot more than I prioritize cleanly winning strikes. You know.
Right. But also, I mean, by sealing it, you're preserving that threat because the seal is face down. Your opponent doesn't know uh that it's not like you discarded it. It's still a live threat. If you really have to, you could pull Gathering Darkness and strike with it again. It's not like it's
Yep.
gone forever. But the threat of it is definitely not gone forever because your opponent doesn't know what's in your sealed area.
Precisely.
I get you. Okay.
honestly, just having this card in your kit is awesome. Would I trade it for a speed 6, range 4 attack that just pokes them, draws me a bunch of cards, moves me into perfect position, does whatever I want? Yeah. But, you play with what you got, and it's not a bad thing to have, honestly.
Right. Okay. And what about wall climb?
I think this boost is terrible.
Okay.
um, uh, Now move 2. You don't even strike. Why would I spend the force on this and the card to play as a boost when I could spend those 2 cards sealed face down to do the same thing and initiate a strike? I mean, come on.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. I guess like after advance 4, I, you're gonna wind up probably at a range that you don't want to be at, unless
Yeah.
you're already exceeded and you can respond with your uh before advance 2. So yeah, I see what you mean. I guess you could use it to get out of the corner, but then you just get yourself back in the corner
If you're so worried about being in the corner, why don't you just initiate a strike, set like a focus or a sweep, and use your ability?
with this. Totally. Okay,
Yeah.
I get you.
You just already have the tools to do everything this does. There have been times I've played it where I just like need to move, but I don't want to initiate a strike for whatever reason.
Right.
Um, it has been boosted before, but one game out of 10, it's not very good boost.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, even in terms of like, unless you're crossing up your opponent by getting out of the corner or something, this is 2 force for 2 points of movement. So what you really are spending for is the after advance 4, which is kind of dubious value for him. It seems like.
Pretty whatever.
Okay, I get you. All right, so we seal it, we threaten with it, we hit with it sometimes to call stuff out. That makes sense. Just seems like a good, like a good mid speed to have.
Yeah.
Okay, and then throwing sickle.
This is one of those attacks where you look at it and then you think, wait, if we're at range 3 and I initiate with this, you have nothing. You can never beat this. And it's true, it beats every normal,
Right.
which is good. Specter
But
Knight doesn't often end up at range 3 to the opponent.
okay, and also then you're going to end up at range 4 after playing this, and you just got done talking about how you're not very good at range 4 until after you've. Well, that's not true. I'm sorry.
But advantage.
You gain advantage. Okay,
You do gain advantage.
I
It
get you.
is an
So
attack. It's clunkier than it looks in this kit. It is a good attack. Sometimes you just get a freebie, and believe me, when your opponent gives you that freebie, you take it.
right, right.
But it's generally pretty awkward and eh.
Okay. And but you did mention an initiation thing that you do like early in the game. You'll
Mhm.
when we were talking about the setup for Gathering Darkness. So this is something that you might uh spend for to move in from range 4 to range 2, and
Mhm.
then you spend this to move back to range 3 or something.
Yeah. It is a lot more exciting of a prospect if you are on your flip side, because the +1 power now suddenly means that your bounding souls and your sweeps heavily disincentivize the opponent from sweeping you back, which is
Right.
what throwing sickle will lose to.
Right.
Um, but it's not even that bad of a trade. This card gets set a lot more than it's used for any other purpose. Because of the purpose that it fills, which is usually a call out for my opponent's spikes, honestly.
Right.
Um, this card ends up in my hand a lot and then gets EX'd later, which is a lot more exciting.
Okay.
Uh, it's just a pretty serviceable shape. It's not terribly exciting. You'll randomly find opportunities where it's good and then you should use it, but it's okay.
Yep. Makes sense.
The boost on it
I'm
is
sorry.
oh
I'm sorry to interrupt really quick.
yeah.
One thing that I think that we should probably be asking about for
Mhm.
Specter Knight in particular for all of these cards. How frequently are you like excited to use these with your ability? So like Spider
Mm.
Scythe coming in from range 4, for example, it seems it's a defensive shape. It seems like you're not. That's not really the point of it. But Dread Talon from range 3 seems like it
That's
could be
just
kind of
spike. I
cool.
mean,
Yeah,
it's just spike.
then you're just spiking without a range shadow.
Yeah, then
Um, and doing this from range 4 or 5 and setting up your is that more common? Like, are you
it is more
excited to?
exciting.
more exciting to do that than to play it normally? You get some benefit out of your ability with that?
Um, yes, it is tricky to answer that kind of question about which ones I'm excited and which ones I tend to do, or which because it again it depends on how tight the opponent is playing. If I'm
Okay.
playing against an opponent who cares a lot about the macro of the game, then I'm a lot less interested in playing a turn one seal two cards, play a throwing sickle, because I think my opponent is going to be the kind of person who will cross out, which is less punishing for a throwing sickle than it is for like an assault, because I get the advantage on after instead of hit. So I'm always
Oh,
getting the
okay.
advantage.
Yep, that's true.
But mm, I like to connect against people
Right.
that play really tight. I am often throwing spider sides or crosses turn one.
Okay. That makes sense.
Um,
Just for that little extra speed to deal with their predicted, like, I don't want to interact with your mix up play.
exactly,
I
exactly.
got you. Okay, cool. So sorry to interrupt. You were talking about Shadow Mirror.
The boost on this card is not good. In a kit absolutely packed to the brim with movement, this is boring. This is
Yeah,
boring and it's not good. Whatever.
you do not need it. It's force efficient movement, but you have better things to do with this card, it sounds like.
Just true. I
Okay.
this might be I probably use this boost even less than I do wall climb.
Okay. How often are you sealing this?
Sometimes. Not
Just
terribly often, but sometimes.
just when you need the when you need the seal to use your front side ability, which as you mentioned is not super common anyway.
Yeah. If it's a critical turn and I'm throwing something and I just have no better options, apologies. Then I'm sealing throwing sickle. But it's one of the better attacks to just hold on to, honestly.
Yeah. Makes sense. And then spin scythe.
Oh, it's one of my favorite attacks in the kit.
It's
It's
a it's a 1 to 2 5/4 with a little bit of guard that draws you a card and then it sprints you away afterward. So you set range 3 or range 4 with this, right?
um no. This attack is very interesting. It is one of the cards in the kit whose shape changes most dramatically after you exceed. And the
Okay.
reason for that is two cards spent from hand is a big ask for a card that can get beaten by a lot of things. Um, this loses to grasp, this loses to cross, this loses to assault. This sometimes beats a sweep and a focus, but then leaves you at range 4 or 5 on your opponent's turn.
Right.
Just range 3 or 4, which we've discussed is not great. So I don't like initiating with this. I will sometimes defend with this to if I think my opponent's set a slow and I don't have a Dread Talon. It serves the same purpose. I hit them, I cross up, I get a card from my trouble.
Right. That makes sense.
However, after you flip, it's suddenly a lot more exciting because you initiate with this at range 4 against an opponent that has, I don't know, a fast poke or something. Well, you guard through it and then you hit them.
Right. Okay. So
You initiate.
that's what the guard is for, because it's not for even if it has the guard, it's still not beating Grasper Cross.
Oh, unless you're on your flip side. Your opponent
Right.
initiates with a grasp or cross, and you're
Now
like,
you're
well, whatever. I
now you're
chase you down and I smack you.
now you're following them with it. Okay, so this
Yeah.
does get way more consistent when you even in melee range. It gets way more consistent
Hmm.
on your exceed side. Okay.
Yeah. Attacks that are good at range one that only lose to like assault are kind of a big deal, actually.
Sure. Yeah, make your opponent spend effectively a mid speed because assault is under curve at that range. That makes sense.
Yeah. Assault is a tough prospect for opponents to set at range one because it trades slightly unfavorably with slows and straight up loses to fasts. So
Right.
it's a big
So
ask.
this is actually, I think, the first time that we've mentioned um, the prospect of using your exceed side or either side of your character ability actually when you're already in melee range. When you're talking about spin
Oh.
scythe, um, so now it's not just this thing over here is not just for range 4 crazy plays anymore. It's to uh you've just turned this card into a cross catcher. You've turned If you play it at range 1, their grasps don't beat it anymore because you move back in afterwards. So this your ability defensively on almost anything with guard uh, makes it more consistent against a lot of movement options in melee range too.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
That is something we've barely touched on actually, which is where a lot of this power comes from. Is
Yeah.
that yes, at range your fasts are now hyper speeds, right?
Right.
Um, but at close range, your slows your opponent can never escape now.
Right. They can't cross out anymore because you can just follow up. Um,
Exactly.
Everything you do chases them down.
Yeah, God forbid I have a health advantage. We're at range 1. I exceed and I'm holding 2 sweeps at a focus.
Oh yeah,
You're done. You
you start
never escape.
yeah, you just start trading forever and they can't get away from you.
Yeah, that's
Gotcha.
that is a very very common situation for
Okay.
Specter Knight, and you are
And
going to win those games.
so yeah, I'm glad that I know we noticed the thing about the 3 guard then, because otherwise I wouldn't have occurred to me to ask to do you do this in melee range too? That seems like a very important, really important information.
Yeah, Spin Scythe is it changes super dramatically. It's sort of fulfills the same role as Dread Talon on the front side. It's kind of
Right.
unexciting, but on the flip side, it suddenly turns into what is essentially just a slow attack with less guard, but it's speed 4, which means that if your opponent also has their own range 1 spike of some sort, and you
Mhm.
initiate with Spin Scythe, you beat both their slows and their fasts and their range 1 mid speeds because it's
Right.
speed 4 and you're going to outspeed them.
It's speed 4. Yeah. Okay.
All of a sudden, it beats everything.
Yeah, so that's as soon as you can staple some movement onto this, and specifically movement from gauge because it'd be a little bit
Hmm.
cheaper. This gets this gets pretty unreasonable.
Yeah.
Got it.
It turns
Interesting.
into, it goes from a pretty medium to bad attack to like the best attack in your kit.
Okay. Cool. Um, and then I'm assuming from what you just said that I haven't even read Dash Slash yet. Draw until you have 4 cards in hand, then strike with a card from your sealed area. Hit again. That's a lot of text.
I'll
What's your read on Dash Slash?
I if I'm on my front side, I'm often using this boost. It's expensive, but it's good text. The thing about these characters, you have to figure out how you're using your ultras.
Okay.
And one of the nicer things you can do is pitch a barrier lantern that's burning a hole in your hand into a dash slash. You seal, especially when you have a low number of cards in your hand, you seal like a card, 2 cards, you draw 4, and now you're striking with something from your sealed area and it has hit gain advantage. So you're like probably drawing more cards after that or doing whatever.
Right.
Um, this is very similar to Gathering Darkness, the boost on Spider Scythe, but with a little extra stapled on. It costs more, it does more, it fulfills the same purpose.
Okay.
I'm usually boosting this instead of striking with the card on the front side.
Until you've exceeded, and then the boost might as well not exist because the attack is so good.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
part of the way that you just keep cards flowing.
That makes sense. Um, yeah, and so this is a draw 4, and odds are you just emptied your hand to play it, so it kind of pays for itself. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily you're not going card positive necessarily on this, but you are getting a whole lot of other things out of it. You're getting a strike, you get advantage. Okay, so it's another high tempo kind of boost.
Exactly.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay. And I'm assuming then that you're very rarely sealing or spending his force spin scythe.
Of the attacks, of the cards in this kit that are both a good attack and a pretty good boost, this is actually one that I seal fairly often.
Okay.
The reason for that is often just like if my hand is like focus, spin scythe, I don't know, spike or something.
Right.
We're at range 4. And I'm like, I need to get in there. Um, I will either boost the spin scythe and uh, burning the 2 cards and get in.
Right.
Um, or range 4 is a bad example. Say we're at range 1. Say we're at range 1 and I really think you have a cross. No, that's also a bad example. Hmm. Um,
I feel like that's actually sort of demonstrative of the point, though, that spin scythe it's something that you'll seal occasionally, but you need a specific example. You need a specific situation where it actually will work to do that,
Yeah.
and
It
those might not be super common.
yeah, that's a weird one to talk about because again,
Sure, sure.
talking theory is weird because all sorts of situations happen. All I'll say is this card actually ends up in my sealed area a lot. I don't know. It's just because of those situations. I'm not really sure why.
I get what you mean, and when you were describing the range, the range foreplay, it's like part of the consideration is like it's not what cards you're trying to hold on to or what cards you're trying to preserve. It's what can I afford to spend to get to where I need to be right now.
Yeah.
I get you. Okay. Then how about we've mentioned Bounding Soul many times already, as being a particularly dangerous card. So tell me a little bit about Bounding Soul.
A Bounding Soul, it was the best of attacks. It was the worst of attacks. You will not find a worse defensive option than Bounding Soul. I mean, look at this miserable shape.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. That's under curve with a really narrow range band. Doesn't get its
It's
own before effect. Uh,
it's understated on every axis.
yeah, it has negative guard somehow. They don't even print that. It's got -2 guard
Yeah, this attack is so bad. Unless
unless you
you're
put some movement
unless
on it.
unless you're using your ability or you're using Judgment Rush, and suddenly it's nonsense.
Right.
Um, yeah, this card ends up in my sealed area more than any other card. Sometimes, usually turn 1, I will throw this at you. Sometimes I'll exceed and we'll have had a turn where I like played a spin scythe into you with my ability, which I then advance into range 4, and then the turn comes back to me and I'm holding a Bounding Soul and I'm like, whatever, cross or die.
Right.
Here's
Yeah.
7.
You just let it rip. But most of the time, you're sealing this, and it's not necessarily you're sealing it so that you can get it back later with Gathering Darkness or with Dash Slash. It's more just
Yeah.
that you got better things to do, and you need some cards to throw.
Yeah. This card's weakness is by far its inflexibility.
Okay.
Um, Sometimes once in a blue moon, I will, on my exceed side, use this at range 1 because then I'll move into range 2 past the opponent and then hit for 7. But why would I do that when I could just play a range 1 to 5 sweep, you know?
Right, right, right. And at that point, it's a call out option in a situation that you don't need a call out for.
Yeah, it's this card is bad except for the rare times when it's broken.
Right. And you'll know those times because you'll hit with it and you'll deal 7 damage and they couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, you'll know those times because you're just like, we're at range 4. My opponent has no blocks. I'm
Yep.
holding this card. I'm holding a Judgment Rush. Wait a minute. This
Huh.
nukes my opponent. And then you do it and your opponent takes
Might
8.
should probably just do that then. How
Yeah,
about how about Vanish?
the boost.
Yeah.
Oh, this boost is bad. It's bad boost. It's not so bad that it's never been used, but 2 force for this is a lot to pay. Eh, sometimes I use it, but no, not
So,
often.
so if and this kind of speaks to what you were saying earlier about the value of the now strike text, because you're willing to pay in some cases kind of almost as much or more
Hmm.
because you can't spend an ultra for that 2 force on your front side ability for advanced 2, not even advanced 3.
Yeah,
But that lets you strike as well. And this is a down payment for later, and your opponent has a chance to respond to it.
yeah. Specter Knight is about killing the opponent now. Actually,
Right.
to that point, if this had before advanced 3, da da da, all that text, um, and then now strike, I would
Yeah.
actually use this.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. No, then all of a sudden you get your action compression and it's competitive with your character ability in a couple of ways. Maybe you don't have the individual cards to pay for your character ability, but you have the raw force to pay for Vanish. But as it stands, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, it would make it so situations pop up. My opponent's some goofy zoner. We're at range 8 for some reason,
Sure,
and
sure.
I prepare up to a handful of cards, and I go, okay, buddy, I boost Vanish, pitching an Ultra. I strike. I use my character ability. Now I have
You
before advance 5.
advance 5, right?
Oh, don't even get me started on using Judgment Rush in combination with your ability because that
Yeah,
happens.
you hit them over on this board over here, they're
Yeah.
that you hit somebody in the game in the lobby you're playing next to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a call out mid speed, but most of the time it's either being used with your character ability to absolutely blow somebody up, or judgment rush to blow somebody up, or you're sealing it or spending it as force.
Yeah. Sometimes this card is a sniper round because your opponent just let you do that to them, which,
Right,
uh, if you're playing against Specter Knight, fear range 4. Don't let the Spectre take their turn at range 4
right, because
if they
he
have this
can.
card and they have Judgment Rush. You're gonna
Yeah,
eat 8.
yeah, he can. There's very little that you can do. And again, unless you have like literally EX cross.
Yeah, which what a sorry state of affairs that is.
Oh yeah. Okay, so
Um,
that's a that's I mean it's not a ringing endorsement of the card if it requires such a crazy boost as Judgment Rush to really come into its own. But being one of the best things to put Judgment Rush onto is kind of a good use case in itself.
yeah, I think it's fine. I think his
Okay,
attack is not good. It gets used. Sometimes it's stupid. Usually
that makes
it's
sense.
be getting sealed.
And we've already talked quite a bit about the quality of the ultras as attacks, and we've also talked about how Buckwild Judgment Rush is.
Yeah.
Um, how about hang on, I have to pronounce the exclamation mark. How about from the grave? How do we feel about that one?
It gets used. Not often. The reality is that this card says discard this for 2 force. Um,
Right.
and you often want to. Usually to play a dash slash, usually to play a judgment rush. So this card is kind of it's got its job that it's doing, and that job is very rarely its boost. That said, there are moments where I exceed. I'm holding one of these, and my deck, I still have like 8 cards left in deck. And there happens to be a lot of diversity in there for some reason. And my sealed area happens to be good cards that I want access to right now.
Right.
Maybe I don't have a ton of cards in hand. Maybe there's a game state in which I'm like, okay, I want to take my deck, swap it with my sealed area. I'm exceeding here, right?
Mhm.
Um, and now I have access to that diversity of cards with this boost because this lets you just take any card from your sealed area and
Oh,
strike.
okay. So you've gotten back all of your good stuff, but there's a
Mhm.
lot of options in there that could fit a specific purpose now that's now in your sealed area. It might not be the stuff that you want all the time, but it's something that you want for one specific situation. When you find that situation, that's what this is for.
Yes, it's
I get you.
happened. It's rare. The reality is that, like I said, this card is kind of bookmarked. It's reserved for being used as force for a couple of things.
Yep.
So it's not often, but it will happen. And when you're exceeding, one of the questions you should ask yourself, or one of the things you should think about when you're asking yourself, do I swap my sealed area in my deck? Is this card in my hand? Because if it
Okay.
is, that's an incentive to swap so you can suddenly your hand is really big,
Right.
essentially.
You can pull anything out of your sealed area and now you have it in there as well. Okay.
Yeah.
And then and you could do it multiple times. Return this card to your hand, lets you recur stuff from your sealed area over and over again. But again, that requires a lot of curation of your sealed area, and over the course of a game, you might not have total control over what's in there.
Yeah. I kind of wish it had some other rider to it. If it had
Mm.
hit draw a card and return this card to your hand, it would be a
Right.
more serious consideration. The
Right.
fact that it costs a force is like a little too steep, but also I don't think you could just make this free. So
Right. So
it's a little overpriced.
for the most part, though, it's okay to just spend this as force. And this one, unless you're using Judgment Rush, uh, and probably spending the other ultra as force to pay for
Hmm.
it. Do you ever spend Dread Reaper as force, or is it Judgment
Yeah,
Rush 100% of the time?
I do spend it as force. The something that can happen if you're not terribly versed in Specter Knight is you get so locked into like, okay, I'm gonna make this judgment rush happen, and
Right.
you let yourself just have a bunch of garbage in your hand, where your
Right.
opponent's playing strikes at you, and you're like, well, I don't want to spend this because I'm gonna spend it as force for the Dread Reaper or the Judgment Rush, and I don't want to use this because it's gonna make me run out of cards. So I'm just gonna wild swing. When
Right.
it's like, just play your focus or whatever,
Right.
just
Yeah, and just or get this out of your hand to get actually good cards so you can keep playing Exceed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't let yourself have a bunch of garbage filling up your hand because you're trying to set up a judgment rush. It's not worth it.
Okay. So if you've got another Ultra or something like that to pay for some of the Force, now you can subsidize it a little bit, but otherwise it's okay to spend.
Correct.
I gotcha. Okay. Um so that's the specials and ultras. We've talked a little bit about the normals and how crazy a lot of them get with before advanced 2. Like almost everything in here uh benefits in some way from being able to staple some additional movement on it. Um in terms of like the I did some put these in the wrong order. In terms of like the normal boosts, are there any is there anything that happens that Specter Knight does that you know, does he get more out of Fierce than Grasp than most characters would, or for the most part, are you using your boosts and your strikes on your normals as normal?
That's a good question. I think playing Spectre Knight compared to other characters. Let me think. I value these attacks quite highly.
Okay.
And the reason will not infrequently sorry, I believe I cut out there.
Yeah, you cut out for a second. I heard the reason dot 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 dot, and then you dropped.
Apologies, I'm getting a spot of lag here.
That's all right.
Um, I value these strikes highly because a common play pattern that will occur with Spectre Knight is on my first turn of the game, I strike, I get in. And then one of us will assault the other. Now we're at range one, and now we're brawling. And I'm not
Right.
using my character ability anymore. I'm throwing grasps at you, I'm throwing focuses, I'm throwing sweeps. And the whole point of this is we're just going to trade, and I'm just going to build gauge because what I use my gauge for is going to be better than what you're going to use your gauge for.
Sure, sure.
What this ends up doing is block is also quite good because it's often a guaranteed
It's
gauge.
frequently free gauge, sure.
It's frequently free gauge, and you are a character who does not have a dearth of great defensive options. So
Right.
um, this is often sealed, actually, assault. And the reason it's often sealed is because I'm not often at range 3.
Right.
Spectre Knight is often at range 1, 2, or 4.
That makes sense. Yeah, you're
Um,
frequently dancing between a couple different ranges, and 3 doesn't usually come up unless uh your opponent moves during a strike or something like that.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh, assault might be the weakest it's ever been in Spectre Knight's kit, actually.
Wow. Just
Um,
just because of the infrequency of the periods where you'll be able to play it.
Yeah, that and it kind of has overlap with other things. If I'm striking and I'm using my ability, that's kind of just a lot spicier than just setting an assault, honestly.
Right.
Um, this is better
It
assault,
it has a lot of the text that Assault has. It's got
but
advantage. It's on
doesn't
curve
lose
at
to slows. Yeah,
it's on curve at 3, but it dodges slows. Okay.
yeah. So assault is the least exciting it's ever been in Spectre Knight's kit, which is a little sad because it is a very good normal.
Sure.
Um, the same is generally true of these. Tech is a powerful boost. I often uh, use the boost on dive way more than I use the attack. Um, the boost on spike defend is something I also use fairly frequently, often as a waiting move. For at
Sure.
range one, I'll just play this. These two cards are friends at range one. If we're brawling, uh, I like to have the cards in my hand serve purpose. I don't generally just like burning cards for just to get them out of the way.
Right.
Um, these three cards are the these four cards. Let's say these five cards. These are the most sealed cards I have.
Okay, they're just the things, and as always, they're not you're not sealing them to get them back later with your boosts. These are expenditures for your ability.
Yeah, generally
Okay,
so.
that makes sense. I gotcha.
Um, other stuff gets sealed often if I'm like, I just need to burn something to use my ability, and I'm like, whatever, I'll get it back later, maybe.
Right. Okay. And these cards up here, and then a couple more like Bounding Soul, are the things that you are most likely to use your ability on. They're
Ooh.
the payout of your ability.
Um, the order in which I have most often set things with my ability probably looks something like I value cross highly. I value this highly. These speed fives. You'll notice that these generally rank by speed.
Right. You're
Uh,
because you're looking to generate gauge.
yeah. These options here, these can lose to things. These
Right.
are generally, I'm happier if you're blocking. These, I'm generally happier if you're crossing.
I see. Okay. You're
And
because you're yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much how it works out.
Okay.
These are, I'm less excited
Right. Because
to
you
play.
would it would require for grass it would require you to be at range 3. You just got done talking about how you rarely are. Um if and then once you exceed, all bets are off and almost everything benefits because you can do it defensively and they're all way more flexible, right?
Yeah, then this looks completely different.
Right. Okay.
Then these are up
Yeah, yeah,
here.
yeah. Now you're blowing them up a couple of times with your slows.
Yeah, then it starts looking like these, and these are like whatever. I don't care about
You're
these
you're
that
less
much.
interested in maybe now. Okay, that makes sense. And now you have more neutral control on some of these boosts or something to set these up. Okay, I get you.
Yeah. Very, very broad sweeps, but the reality is that that whole equation looks totally different depending on my opponent and the reads I've got on them.
Sure, sure.
Um,
This is and Exceed is a complicated game even before you get into the fact that there's a whole nother person across from you playing it. Um, this is probably the most we'll be able to get into in a lesson without you know people watching this. Go out there, play some Specter Knight, and find some of these solutions for yourself. This is just a good starting point.
yeah. Uh,
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
please. No, please.
I was going to ask you first if there were any other kind of considerations, anything that you wanted to mention about Specter Knight's game plan or his kit that we haven't covered yet, and then if you didn't, I had kind of one more big question to end the lesson with.
Hmm. Um, the main thing else that comes to mind is that yes, you burn a lot of resources to throw attacks, but they're just attacks. They're not a fundamental necessary piece of your game plan in the sense that like don't be scared of throwing attacks that are not sure things. It's okay to lose strikes. I play a lot of Sea Viper, who
Mhm.
has this boost called Stylish, which
Yep.
you play it, you draw a bunch of cards, you take another action, but your opponent gets a bunch of power.
Yep.
And often you'll see this play pattern of play that, play another one. The opponent has +6 power, and then you throw an attack, and then the opponent like randomly beats it, and you take 10.
Right.
A lot of people just concede the game at that point, and sometimes sometimes it's a lost cause at that point. But like I have come back so many times from a hole like that. If you burn a bunch of stuff on a judgment rush and you throw a spike and your opponent calls you out, crosses, and you miss, and you're like, okay, I burnt my whole hand and got nothing for it.
Right.
Just like keep playing. It's not that big a deal. You can still easily win. This is a character where you all you're doing when you're spending these resources is you're creating advantages and strikes. And yeah, you're gonna have to take a couple turns to prepare, and your opponent might get like a free hit on you, but just keep the cards coming. Just keep throwing strikes with these high tempo advantages. Like
Mhm.
the game will still claw back in your favor if you keep playing and you keep throwing good attacks.
Right.
It's okay to miss attacks.
And it sounds like most importantly, like keep the pressure on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, you will lose attacks. It
Right.
happens in tournaments. It happens when there's stakes. Uh, just keep your head up. Keep throwing value. Keep. It's okay to lose strikes. A lot of reason that players get disheartened from characters like Specter Knight and Sea Viper and like Nana Say, for example, is another one.
Mm.
Is you do these high risk, high investment strikes and then you lose them. And yes, it's bad, but it's not the only one of the game. There's more coming. You can come
Right.
back from a deficit. Just keep playing.
Right. Yeah. It's on you now to use the rest of your resources to get out of that hole, but it is possible to do.
Yes. I want to stress that the hole that you've put yourself in is not as deep as it feels.
Sure. Sure. No, that's actually really good advice, I think, for almost any character, because it can definitely feel like a lost cause when you are, you lost 3 mix-ups in the early stages of the game, and it just feels impossible. One thing that I
Yeah.
like to I like to think is like, all right, they called out my mix-up with a focus, and it's the one thing that beat my card. Okay, That's one less focus for later.
Yeah. Um, I think I play against a lot of players who will lose three mix-ups and then feel like the game is over.
Yep.
It's just not how Exceed is.
Yeah.
Your life total is just your life total, and yeah, maybe you lost some important cards, and maybe your opponent uh has a bunch of advantage over you now. But like, it's not that hard to come back. I don't know.
Yep.
That's a weird thing to say.
No,
It
it's
feels more lost than it is. I promise.
I think I agree with you, and it's good to hear that. I think that's valuable advice. Actually, speaking of
Mhm.
lost games and things like that, the final question that I had is actually about counterplay to Specter Knight. So, a competent opponent, one who is not letting you get away with your game plan for free, is going to
Mhm.
have counterplay to Specter Knight, is going to be doing things in order to make his life as hard as possible. What are those things that they're doing? And more importantly, what is Specter Knight doing to try to deal with that counterplay? Like, how does he have to adapt to what his opponents are stopping him from, or like, what when he's struggling with a matchup, when they're throwing something at him that he just can't deal with? What is he doing?
Mm. So, to play a character like Specter Knight, you have to be brave. You have to be able to throw a ton of resources into a strike and then be ready for it to go wrong. Like be ready
Okay,
to lose that strike, which is that's just part of how it goes.
right.
Um, to beat a character like Specter Knight, you have to be braver.
Okay,
You have to be braver. To beat a Specter Knight, you have to do two things. The first is call out when Spectre's being greedy. If you if something about your opponent's Specter Knight stinks, they boost a Judgment Rush, they strike, and you're like, I just feel in my heart of hearts that this is a spike.
right.
I say go for it. I say
You
play the assault that misses and loses to everything, except if your opponent just Judgment Rush to spike and they move into range one and miss.
So you need to call out their mix-ups, and you need to not be afraid of you need to not, fold over in front of them when they're running at you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't be like, whatever, my opponent's played an impossible attack. I just wild swing.
Right.
Sometimes you just go, okay, you know, thinking about my hand, thinking about this turn. I think you're playing a slow. I'm just gonna play a dive and just get my 5 damage in, right?
Right.
If it's a slow. And sometimes that happens and you get a gauge for your trouble instead of flat nothing.
Right. Sure.
That's the first thing is you gotta be a little brave and you gotta go into those tough, high disadvantage attacks and just angle to get a little bit of value out of them.
Right.
Um, maybe you have a thing that only wins if your opponent's setting one exact card. I don't know. Try for it. You generally will have card advantage over the Spectre Knight anyway because of how many resources he burns.
Oh, sure.
What's one card from your hand instead of something random?
His options are dwindling over the course of the game because he's spending a lot of force. I guess at the same time, though, some of it is going to sealed area, so it's not quite as uh, you can't always know what he has left the way that other people can. So you do have to kind of trust your gut a little bit with him.
The other half of being braver than Spectre Knight is you have to just initiate more strikes against him. Like I
Okay.
said, his defensive game is like pretty not great. He needs to call things out and be brave in the same way. This dude brawls.
Right.
Uh, by nature of his ability, he's not a set play character. And if you try to do set play against him, he'll just use his ability. Now you're on an even playing field. You boosted his speed boost. You're at range 3. He's using his before advance. So now you're kind of even Stevens.
Kind of the same thing. Sure.
Yeah. Um, and but now he's initiating into you. You
Right. And
might have been better served to just strike.
just punch him. Okay.
Yeah. You gotta brawl. You gotta play on his terms sometimes. Some
Okay.
characters have a kit that can do better, more interesting things, but oftentimes you just gotta brawl the Spectre Knight. You just gotta play on his level.
Okay. And so Specter Knight then, when faced with an opponent who is willing to call his mix-ups and
Mhm.
is willing to aggress into him consistently, it doesn't sound like he needs to change his game plan very much at all. It sounds like he just needs to do it better.
He needs to just do it better. He needs to
Okay.
sit down and get into the mind of his opponent and be like, okay, you're calling me out. So does that mean I need to play a little tighter, a little closer to the chest? Does that mean I
Right.
need to be setting range 4 assaults instead of range 4 spikes?
Right.
And can I do that in a way that you can't tell that I've made the change?
Right. 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 So you're and this tracks with everything that you've said about how your play patterns are very reactive to your opponent. You know, you need to know the person that you're fighting.
Yeah, to me, I play Exceed like poker
Yeah.
instead of like chess.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Because the way Specter Knight is, he's just not going to let you have a long game,
Right.
usually.
Yeah. One of you is going to be dead pretty fast.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. And it sounds like and Fakey, unless you have more to add, I've learned a ton about Specter Knight, and I think I've got what I need for this.
Awesome.
Um yeah, no, thank you so much. But it sounds to me like if there's other people out there who want to play, I can think of a couple players who want to play Exceed like poker and who want to call people's mix-ups and get on Yomi layers and do a little bit less card game and a little bit more brawling.
Mhm.
It sounds like Specter Knight's the character for them. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for people to see this so that they can, again, because I don't think people talk about this character enough, and I'd like to represent him a little bit, uh, more prominently. So hopefully people out there like you who really vibe with Specter Knight, I hope they can get some information out of this.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure. Uh,
Likewise, I really really did enjoy it, and thank you so much for your time and for your expertise.
and thank you for reaching out. It's been a good time, and I like going on my weird tangents about this stuff.
Oh yeah, no, you honestly, you were downright brief. We're just at an hour and a half, so this was a very very concise lesson by excess exceed standards.
Well, if my gameplay is anything to go by, I generally like to keep
Yeah,
things brief.
we fit we finished this lesson before the first reshuffle.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, Fakey, in the spirit of that, then I will let you go. Thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. And anybody watching this, thank you so much for your time and your attention. Hope you learned something. And I'll see you all for the next one. Bye, everybody.